We'll move to the third speaker. Dr. Arnold Guloy is currently the Morse Professor of the Department of Chemistry, another chemist, at the University of Houston. He will talk to us about a topic which is also at the core of what PAASE has been doing. So he will share with us his experience on a Philippine-US collaboration in graduate education and training, the UP and University of Houston experience. Dr. Arnold.
I'm glad to be here, and I'd like to share with you some tips or our experience in trying to help Philippine science. Before I give the talk, I was told to read the PDP 2017 and see if what we're doing fits. And I had to read it, that abridged version. And reading it led me to the second quote, which is what the U.S. National Academy of Science said 2,000 years ago, that growth, so completely have science and technology dominated the pattern of our growth, that when a man in the street speaks of progress, he usually means scientific and technological progress. And I guess that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach people, the man in the street, what science is all about. And just to give you another aspect, because we're dealing with graduate education, the topic of what I'm giving a talk is that the grand challenges of today, and that is what we're going to do in graduate education, or in education and research are going to be tied in, has to be multidisciplinary. And so the new graduate student, the new graduate program, has to be more complex than it was before. And we have to teach people many skills in shorter time. So what Michael and Toto said, or the speakers this morning, particularly Father Nebra said, that we should learn from the Chinese. And that's what I did. I happened to have an office mate when I was a graduate student, Jian Hualin, who was a postdoc at that time when I was a graduate student. And we talked a lot about China and how it was going to grow. And now he is the current president of Beijing University. And we are each other's sounding board. So I visit him quite often, at least every year. And he always asks me, how is the Philippines now? How is your program? And then I was also fortunate that my best friend happens to be the son of Chung Dao Li. And one time I visited University of Michigan. I was there for 3 days. And Chung Dao Li was visiting Stephen Lee, his son. And I spent 2 nights drinking wine with Chung Dao Li. Since he was a particle physicist and I was a solid-state chemist, there was no science common to this. So what we talked about mainly was China, science, education. And so these are the things that I learned from my talk and my talks with him. And it is summarized. Chung Dao Li referred me to this paper in 1999, which gives the history of how China developed its science and technology after the Cultural Revolution. It starts in the late 1970s. Remember, Mao Zedong died in 1976. And before that, there was the Cultural Revolution. The scientific infrastructure of China was devastated, was gone. And it was then, for those who were in graduate school in the 90s and the 80s, particularly in chemistry, about half of the graduate population were Chinese. And so it turns out it was a government decision. It was a policy by the Chinese government to send students out to develop their human capital, regardless of whether they're coming back or not. One of the things that Chung Dao Li told me was, if all the students came back, we don't have the jobs for them. But he said, time will come that they will return. So it was a Chinese government policy, basically, to send students out and then develop infrastructure for it. Now, one of the things that was very important also, at the highest level of the Chinese government, they said basic science was important. And that there has to be a balance between basic science and applied. And he says, and the quote here is, consistent with the policy of the Party Central Committee, has always been that the Academy of Sciences in China should be responsible for basic sciences. And you know, there are many Academy of Sciences in China. So there is an emphasis on basic science. Why? Because they said that's where you produce the difficult problems when you can train graduate students. So this is where the Chinese-American scientists came in. So in the late 70s, the first American exchange programs between China and the United States was done by Chinese-American scientists. And I hope that's sort of what PAASE would try to do. And it was in the name of scientific internationalism, sort of, but Chung Dao Li told me it was a deep sense of nationalism. So what is important also was the Chinese-American scientists introduced how science works to the fledgling, beginning science infrastructure in China. More importantly, is what Chung Dao Li said, that they introduced the peer process. And that is very important in the development of science, is peer review process. Also, they introduced the funding mechanisms. They copied the American, or the best parts of the American system, and applied it to the Chinese. Oh, one of the things that is very important, and that's sort of what Chung Dao Li said, he said, well, they had to listen to me. I was a Nobel Prize winner. And that's sort of what he said, was the scientific community has to be autonomous from government politics. So in essence, what also important was it became a golden opportunity for the Chinese-American scientists to have a profile, going back at the same time, having a bigger profile in their adopted country. And it led to a sense of their own scientific community. And that's sort of what is very important. Now, this is where Jinhua Li told me it was very important. That struck me, was that according to around 1996, there were over 1,000 academic professionals in the United States coming from mainland China. And Chinese government was proud of it. So what was the role of the Chinese-American community? Was the first and principal role they did was they facilitated the admission of Chinese graduate students to the American graduate programs. Because that is important, because remember, in the Cultural Revolution, there were no grades. Okay, there were no grades. So how are you going to help your countrymen, wherein there's no record, go into the American graduate program? So Chung Dao Li and his group came up and proposed what became a very popular program. They called the China-US Physics Examination and Application. So in essence, it was the Chinese-American community, science community, that began filtering and identifying the best students. And it was later expanded to biology, of course, chemistry, math, and engineering. So, in essence, this program that the Chinese-American scientists, or physicists, became what was the admission process for the Chinese students in lieu of the GRE and TOEFL. And what was more striking was the American universities accepted them. So the top 100, always the top 100 students in that application program were automatically admitted by the US graduate programs. Now, this is where it's very important when they said that we have no scholarships to offer for our graduate students. Let me point this out. In the American system, in the American graduate programs, we like good students. We will pay for good students. And the Chinese knew that. So they sent their students to apply to American graduate programs on their own. And they will be given scholarships in the forms of graduate assistantships, either as TAs and RAs. And when you're a TA or an RA, your tuition is free. So the Chinese knew that. And they reserved the money. This is what they said. They reserved the money that they had for postdoctoral training, for those who did not get a US PhD. So now actually it's now required, for example, in China, to be promoted to a full professorship. you must have a U.S. science experience. So here's the case. So I asked John Lin, how about the brain drain? Well, the president of the Beijing University said, what brain drain? It's a minor thing. It is a minor thing to them. Mainly because, one, if they all return, as I said, they don't have the jobs for them at that time. Second is they want their students to flourish, so they can flourish in the American system. And if they flourish in the American system, and the right time comes, they can come back, which is now what's happening. So they had this prediction, they saw this, they saw the vision, that ultimately, when the conditions are ripe, the Chinese community is going to come back. The Vietnamese read this, and they have followed it to the letter and improved on it. I'm actually a consultant for BEF, and they produced 600 PhDs since 2000 to 2015. 600 PhDs under the same program or under the same template that the Chinese used. Okay? And what's nice is the Vietnamese are even smarter. They got the US government to pay half. So the Vietnamese template is the US government pays the first 2 years of the graduate fellowship, and the university, the American university, pays the other 3 years. And that's the template for the VEF program, which ended this year, 2015, and of course that last cycle, the last graduates will graduate in 2019. And what the Vietnamese government is going to do is they're going to take over the US counterpart. That means the Vietnamese government will pay 2 years, and then they will say the American university will pay the other 3. And the American university says, sure, we get 2 extra years. So when they say we don't have scholarships for our students, there are. The Americans are giving scholarships. Knowing this, these are the 2 people, I would say, that are most responsible for the UH Philippine or UP program. We had a dean, John Baer. He passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately. But he was the spirit behind this. Because along the way, between the first contacts in 1997 to the final signing of an MOU in 2007, okay, it took 10 years. Whereas other countries, we went to China, Vietnam, 6 months we had the MOU, we had the MOA. The Philippines, it took 10 years. So as I said, the initial contacts were in 1997. A UP chemistry professor came to visit UH, and she mentioned that they're running out of faculty in chemistry. And so we went to see Dr. Baer, and Dr. Baer said, yes, we'll do it, we'll help you. And he had the condition, which is actually, in hindsight, it was the best decision. He had the good view of it. He said, you must involve the university, the whole university, not just you and the faculty. It has to be the entire university. The president must be involved. And it turns out it had to be that way. Then the other one, he says, in a graduate program, you have to involve the entire faculty. It shouldn't be you. You should not clone yourself, essentially what Dr. Baer told me. Do not clone yourself. Otherwise, what's the point? So in 1999, well, just to show that we wanted to help, okay, we opened it unilaterally. We decided to admit Filipino students, okay, under special consideration. What do you mean by special consideration? What I mean by special consideration is we have a 10-year elementary high school, which when GATT was signed, and this is again due to GATT, when GATT was signed, and we are a signatory to GATT, all the educational levels had to be uniform. And we were the only country at that time, in 1999 or 2, who did not change our educational system to follow the GATT laws. Okay? And so we were at a bind. they will not recognize a Philippine bachelor degree. It was 2 years short. So the minimum requirement to admit into a graduate program, and this is even true in Europe, okay, is that the Philippine applicant should have at least a master's. Now, the other problem we also had, or what we also wanted to do, as I said, was we wanted the Filipino chemistry student applicants to have a varied, discipline in chemistry. So I started telling students, go to physical chemistry, or go to organic chemistry, go to organometallic chemistry, go to surface chemistry. Try to be as wide as possible. That was our goal, because ultimately, if they return, then we'll have more skills. We just didn't want to focus on organic chemistry. We didn't just want to focus on physical chemistry. And as I said, after 10 years, an MOU and an MOA was signed. But fortunately, we were already prepared. So let me just tell you about what our department is. It's one of the 6 departments in our college. I would say we have 32 tenure faculty. We are expanding. This is one of the motivations behind trying to recruit good graduate students, is we're expanding the department. Currently, we have about 150 graduate students and 35 postdocs, and we have over 350 undergraduate students. And these are our research strengths: materials chemistry, polymer chemistry, synthetic solid-state inorganic chemistry, which is my specialty, synthetic organic chemistry with synthetic methodology and catalysis and drug discovery. And of course, we have a very strong theoretical chemistry. So what are the MOU and MOA provisions that we were able to do? We were able to do 2 things, and it took quite an effort to do this. One was we were able to waive the GRE requirements for Filipino students. Second was we were able to waive the 10-year rule. We found a way. Then the funding. The funding was going to be paid for by the university. So we will give them graduate tuition fellowships for 5.5 years max. And their first 2 years will be as TAs, and their last 3 years will be as RAs. So there was no money involved in terms of what the university or what the Philippines was going to offer. Then, just to be sure, and this is actually my idea, was to test which one works. So we created 3 tracks. The first track was our regular track. We take them, what the Chinese did. Regular track, we took the graduate students, they finish in a regular manner, paid for by a graduate fellowship. Then we also had our joint PhD, wherein at the end of the course or the term, they get 2 degrees. One from the University of Houston and one from the University of the Philippines. And then finally, we did what DOST and the Philippines is doing, the sandwich program. So anybody can come either under these 3 tracks. So the outcomes. So from 2000, this is the only record I could get, 2001 to 2018, we have over 50 Filipino students admitted in the department. And 2 went into our joint PhD program. Out of the over 50 admitted students, we were able to produce 36 PhD degrees in chemistry under the regular track. And those who couldn't complete the PhD were given masters, and there were 12 of them. Then, of course, physics heard about this, math heard about this, geology heard about this, and they said we should be in there too. So they were able to get students, 1 from physics, and then a number from geosciences and math under this program. So it was sort of just an extension. And then we had about 16 sandwich students, mostly in engineering. They had a 1-year sandwich program in chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. So what is the result after they get their PhD? 4 of them, 4 of the 36, are now faculty at UP, at the Institute of Chemistry. So in a way, we were able to do what the faculty wanted us at that time. And we have 1 sandwich graduate student, graduate who is also in the chemistry department at UP. And then, as I said, most of the sandwich students are now in engineering. or faculty in engineering. And then, of course, others have gone to careers in the US and Europe. Now, let me just give you some snippets of the people who finished our program. The first one is Marlon Conado. He got his PhD in 2012. As I said, they did not do their PhD under my supervision. I told them, in fact, this is one of the things that Dr. Baer told me. You shouldn't take advantage of it. Otherwise, they'll see that it is self-serving. So, in a way, I tried not to take any student, just to show, because I remember in my previous slide, there are suspicions. Okay? That's one of the things that I had to overcome. Suspicions within the UH, wherein they think that, why are these Filipino students getting a great deal? We don't, it's sort of a self-serving thing. The other one was there's also suspicions from the University of the Philippines, which lasted 10 years. Partly for, why are they taking it? They seem to think that we are taking their graduate students. So going back, we have Marlon Conado, who did his PhD in inorganic chemistry in 2012. He's currently an associate professor in chemistry at UP. He did his PhD with Alan Jacobson, our Welch professor, a very famous inorganic solid-state chemist. And then he did his postdoc with Jeff Reimer, one of our young rising stars in the chemical engineering department. And so he has used what he learned from Alan Jacobson and Jeff Reimer to now, he's now running his own program here, a research program at the Institute of Chemistry. The other one is, you probably know her, Aimee Martinez. She's a graduate. She did physical chemistry. She then postdoc, or her work mainly was on ionic liquids, studying the interface chemistry and physical chemistry of ionic liquids, which then she did SSG and SHG measurements. Then we also have Catherine Cimatu. She's now an assistant professor, tenure-track assistant professor at Ohio University. She invented, and that's sort of what I always wanted, I identified faculty in our department who were really great, who were great mentors. So I would push our Filipino students to work for them. One of this was Steve Baldelli. And Catherine was his first student. And they invented the IR microscope, wherein they use infrared to image molecules on the surface. And they're now, this is now, it's now been, they patented this, and now they are selling it as an instrument. She did then postdoctoral work at Texas A&M and at Oak Ridge National Lab before she then started her tenure-track position at Ohio University. Then we have people who went to industry, who are now doing extremely well in industry. One of them is Hendrik Chong. He worked for Olaf Douglas. Olaf Douglas is a rising star in catalysis. And Hendrik Chong was his first student. See, I mean, I identified good faculty, and then I tried to give them a Filipino student to learn, because normally the first two graduate students learn most from their mentor. So they were able to invent or discover a catalyst, Olaf's and Hendrik. And that catalyst later on became the basis for his job at Celanese, where he's now the principal scientist, and they built a plant for his process in Spain. So other outcomes that we've done, in 2014, we submitted a joint proposal, UH and UP, to NSF, which is the Partnership for International Research and Education. It was reviewed well. Unfortunately, it wasn't funded, so we plan to resubmit once the program is revived under the Trump administration. We also continued UH faculty visits from chemistry and chemical engineering to UP. We also have UH-UP collaborations, informal, among our former students and their mentors. And then now what they're developing now is there is now money that we can use to support UP faculty to visit UH at our expense. And of course, the most important thing when the Filipino PhD student graduates is I tell them, those who are going to stay in the United States, better be sure you help those who are going home. And they've created their own network. And of course, we always try to follow up among our students and the advisors. The success of this template has been adapted to other UH colleges. The engineering has copied our template, the College of Technology and the Department of Biology. And Vietnam, again, Vietnam is interested in using our template. And they have approached us that if they could do the same thing. And the same thing goes with Thailand. We have now a number of Thai students we just completed an MOU under this template. So let me remind you, these are the trends in US graduate programs. The most important thing is we project a large increase in the international student population, mainly because the demand for graduate students is going to be high. And American students do not want to go to grad school. So we project that there will be a high demand for international students. And as I said, funding is going to be from the United States. Okay? And it's sort of a point wherein maybe Filipino students should take advantage of it. Okay, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guloy.